call this meeting to order. I'll ask Bridget to state the meeting and call the roll.
A special session has been held on Saturday, March the 8th, 2014 at 7:30 a.m. in the 5th floor of the Municipal Office Building for a Commission Strategic Planning Session. Roll call. Mugia.
Here.
Maddox.
Out of town, but here.
Kane.
Here.
Markley.
Here.
Walters.
Here.
Philbrook.
Here.
Walker.
Here.
Townsend.
Here.
McKiernan.
Here.
Holland.
Here. Thank you very much. We are beginning our strategic plan. This is a follow-up to our last. The Commission has agreed in principle that we should do this twice a year, once prior to the budget and once in the fall to update our agenda. We had a meeting last May, immediately after the election, for all of us to come together and be brought up to date on our strategic plan. In October, we really had an opportunity for this new commission to make that strategic plan our own, and so worked on adjusting it. One of the major adjustments that came out of the October strategic plan was a changing of the budget process and accelerating the budget process into the winter and beginning it essentially 6 months earlier than we normally have. And so that process has been underway. We're going to review a lot of that today, but we are scheduled to go until 2 o'clock today. We appreciate everyone who has joined us in the audience today. This is our best attendance ever for a strategic plan. And we also appreciate everyone who's watching either now or later on the video. So thank you everyone for being here today. The first item of business I'd like to do is we have a blue sheet today, and please pass that out. If it's back, now it's back on. This is my line. I just got here. I haven't used up that much airtime yet. All right, this blue sheet is a communication from myself to the Commission appointing a county administrator. I'll read my memo to the Commission. Today, I'm proud to announce Doug Bach as my candidate for the position of Unified Government County Administrator. The Commission hired a search firm which conducted a national search. There were over 100 interested and 39 who presented full resumes. I interviewed personally 8 candidates. I presented 3 finalists who were interviewed by the Commission and also had an opportunity to present before a panel of the public. As a result of those interviews and input from the Commission, Doug Bach is my choice. Doug has been employed at the Unified Government since 1991, starting his career as budget analyst and working his way through the organization until 2003, when he was appointed Deputy County Administrator, a position he currently holds. Doug has said he looks forward to working with the Commission and with myself as we continue to create the vision we share for this community. And before we call for a vote, I do want to say, I said from the beginning, I believe that this needed to be a nationwide search. I don't believe that we hire someone just based on whose turn it is, but based on the quality of their candidacy. And in looking at the resumes that we saw from nationally and looking at the interviews, Doug is our clear choice today. So I thank you very much for your application and your interest and your longtime service to our community. And with that, I will call for the roll.
Roll call. Mugia.
Aye.
Maddox.
Aye.
Kane.
Aye.
Markley.
Aye.
Walters.
Aye.
Philbrook.
Aye.
Walker.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
That vote is 9-0. That motion passed.
Congratulations, Doug. All right, and now the work begins.
Back in the glory for long, do you?
No, that's right.
That's good. I like that.
Start over. Yeah. Starting you off with a 6-hour retreat. That's good. Well, welcome, and we are now ready to begin. I'm pleased to have Patty Gentrup with us today. Patty is with the consulting services. Shockey Consulting, and she's been working with us actually for 3 or 4 years now. Has worked with us, and she keeps coming back, which is remarkable. Is that what you were just saying? She's worked with us for 3 or 4 years and keeps coming back, which is remarkable in its own right. But started this under Mayor Reardon and has helped to walk us through our initial strategic planning process, and has been here and has brought a lot of consistency to this presentation. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Patty. Thank you again, and we appreciate your being here.
I'm glad to be here, and let me be, I guess, perhaps the first to congratulate Mr. Bach on his appointment as county administrator. I look forward to watching him work with the mayor and commission and the staff and the community to continue the great things that are going on in Wyandotte County, KCK, and even greater things. So congratulations, Doug. Glad to be here. Glad to keep being invited back. Let me figure out how to. There we go. So our agenda for today. First of all, we have a lot, right? We have 6 hours to go through quite a bit of information. At the end of the day, what we're really hoping is that you provide staff some general direction regarding your priorities for building the 2015 budget. The decisions, the direction that you give today will be used by staff as they come back to you on March 20th. To really kind of finalize building that, the parameters for building that budget. So, but to get to that point, first of all, we want to review just a little bit what happened, what you decided in October of last year. And there were 3 things that you really discussed last year in October. First of all, looking ahead, you're anticipating some additional revenues to begin in 2017. So what are your long-term strategies for use of those revenues? Secondly, you started talking about building the 2015 budget, which is just amazing to me, given that we weren't even 2014 yet. But you started talking about that, and so you gave your initial direction regarding the 2015 budget. And then lastly, you talked about the budget process itself, and what did that look like, and how should those changes be made? So we'll take just a few minutes to look over that information. But that was 5 months ago. As you all know, a lot has happened in the last 5 months. A lot has happened, and there's a lot more new information. And so you'll see on kind of the meat of this agenda is really focusing on that new information, starting with a citizen survey that was just conducted last month. There's a long list. We anticipate, however, that survey discussion is going to take quite a bit of time. So maybe we'll allocate up to even an hour for that survey, because we don't want to give that short shrift. So we'll talk about all of that new information. And then at the end of the day, we're really hoping what you can do is, again, give that general direction to the staff in terms of either establishing or reestablishing priorities for the development of the 2015 budget. So that's kind of our day as we go ahead. Any questions or comments on where we're going today? Okay, great. Okay, this is kind of a fuzzy little picture, but you might have seen it in the paper here recently. This shows, did you read about the couple in California who was walking along the beach, and they found this ancient, this gold, I think from the 1800s, and it was worth like $10 million, and it was on their property, so they got to catch it. So that was their pot of gold, that was their pot of gold. Well, you have a little bit, for a person, $10 million is a lot, right? For the unified government, for Wyandotte County, KCK, it'd be a nice little chunk of change, but doesn't get you exactly where you want to be. And I don't think that we found that pot of gold, but certainly we're looking ahead to some additional revenue. So again, just to review just briefly what we talked about in October, in 2017, what you're really looking forward to is that the STAR bonds for the development in the west part of your community will have been paid off. You're going to have additional money from the Hollywood Casino, and you're hoping that you'll have a return on some other development projects. So right now, the conservative estimate is that you'll have an additional $12 million in 2017. Wow, $12 million. So what do we do with that? And in October, we talked about kind of one-time expenditures versus multiple expenditures over time. And we gave you a lot of different examples at the time, and I don't want to repeat all of those, but just a couple of examples that we talked about. First of all, there's been a lot of discussion about reducing the mill levy in your community, and I think that there's agreement that is one of your priorities. So $12 million, let's use that to reduce the mill levy, right? Well, if you did that at the time, these are the numbers from October. So Lou, if they've changed a little bit, I apologize. They're the numbers from October. But if you use $12 million, that $12 million to just, let's use it all to reduce the mill levy, it'd be about a 13 mill levy reduction. And on a $100,000 home, the taxes would be reduced from $941 to $792, or about 16% reduction in their taxes. But that would be a one-time expenditure. You would not have that money again. No other priorities could be addressed now or in the future. Another thing we talked about was salaries for your employees. A 1% increase is about $1.4 million in expenditures. And for every 1% you add, that's $1.4 million, and it's an ongoing expenditure. So basically that's, again, a one-time decision. There's been a lot of discussion about your enterprise funds and fund balance. I know you even had a discussion, I think, on Thursday night related to the fund balance. And this just lists kind of some restoration to some of the enterprise funds and then your general fund balance goal. So there was discussion on how you could use that increased revenue to pay back and restore some of those fund balances over the course of time. Also, capital projects. What's the decision? Do we use cash and pay for them, pay as you go, or do you issue credit over the course of time? So considering those examples as well as some other things that we talked about, this was the direction, kind of your strategies for use of that additional revenue that you expect to see in 2017. Let's make sure that we focus on reducing the property tax over time. Again, not one fell swoop was the decision, but over the time, how do we reduce property taxes? Let's repay that money that was borrowed from those funds that I described, as well as restore the general fund balance. And then let's address long neglected needs, whether that's maintenance of facilities, investment in infrastructure, compensating our employees, or hiring additional employees. So those were the long-term strategies. Then we said, okay, we looked out long-term, let's look out kind of shorter term. And your direction at that time for the development of the 2015 budget was maintaining the property tax levy at its current rate. So again, no immediate reduction. You're looking at reduction of the property tax rate over time. Begin to design infrastructure projects this year and in 2015 with anticipated construction to begin in 2016. Launch an employee compensation and classification study, and then also begin a complete review of the public safety functions. And it's my understanding that under the fourth bullet, money has been allocated in 2014 for a review within the fire department. So before I turn it over to Commissioners McKiernan and Markley to talk a little bit about the budget process, any reflection or comments regarding those decisions or discussions that you had in October?
I would just reflect on the balance that I think we talked about it at length in October, and I think it's worth refreshing. And you mentioned it already. That difference between one-time expenditures and ongoing expenditures. So for instance, if we, for a cost of living increase for employees, that money is not only committed that year, but it's committed for every year going forward. For expenses that are committed to debt, if we debt finance something, we're not just committing that money for that year, we're committing it over the long term. So we have, and a mill levy reduction. When we reduce the mill levy, that revenue is taken away for the long term. So those were what we would call kind of an ongoing expenditure. Money that we spend, for instance, in restoring a fund balance. If we put $2 million in fund balance, that money's in the fund balance, but also that $2 million revenue is available the following year as well. So we get that money back to continue to spend again. any capital expenditures we do with cash with that money. We'll spend, say we spend $4 million on capital with that money. That $4 million comes back the next year because we've not obligated it over time. So really thinking about that $12 million in terms of expenses that commit that money long-term versus expenses that commit that money short-term where we have a new choice to make the next year. Does that make sense? I think that's a very important distinction in terms of how we allocate those funds. And that was one of the reasons, for instance, that in 2014, we agreed to do what amounts to a 1% bonus for our employees. A 1% bonus is a one-year expense, but it does not necessarily carry over to the next year unless we reallocate it, like a cost of living increase does. So just to keep that in mind, because as we move forward, we'll only get to spend these dollars one time, and we need to be thoughtful about which ones we commit long-term and which ones we commit in a way that they repeat. So.
Thank you, Mayor. I've got a question as well.
Yes, Commissioner Maddox.
Yeah, my question is in regards to tax reduction. Based off what you just said, if we took the $12 million and put it toward tax reduction, would that only be a tax reduction for 1 year, or would it be continually?
It would be if once you reduce the mill levy, it is reduced continually until you raise the mill levy. So you can reduce the mill levy for 1 year and then come back the next year and raise it back up. That I would suggest that would be poorly received. But you could, but yes, once you commit money to a mill levy reduction, then that mill levy is reduced and that income is off the table for the long term. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
That's an important question. Thank you.
Any others? Okay, Commissioners McKiernan and Markley, did you want to talk about the changes in the budget process and also where you are now in that process?
Sure. So this is our budget timeline. As you can see, the actually current is the old way of doing things. Everything's sort of focused on the end. We are right in the middle of what is labeled proposed, but it's what is actually now our current process. So February we had our first public hearing, and we're also going to get our survey results today. So we're right there in the middle where that strategic planning happens. And we'll be heading into what's more of what we would think of as a traditional budget season beginning in May and June. So sort of where we stand and how it looks different from what we've done in the past.
And I think our hope was to accomplish two major things by revising the schedule, because after we talked after the last budget, I know we all feel that it's really compressed and there's not enough time to be thoughtful about all that we have to consider. So stretching it out allows us more time to be thoughtful, but stretching it out allows us time to have strategic planning discussions before the first draft or early in the drafting of the budget. That gives us more ability to direct up front rather than try to change on the backside after a draft has already been created and some assumptions have been made. So we're hoping that the additional time and the new placing of strategic planning and some additional input from the survey will allow us to give better direction to staff on creating the budget.
Okay. Any other comments on the process, or just kind of explain where you are? Okay. I think we're ahead of schedule, which is good because there's a lot to talk about.
Don't worry, we can fall behind.
Yeah, I know. I didn't say that would continue through the day, but all right, great. So the bulk of our morning is going to be talking about new information to you. And the very first point of our discussion will be the results of the survey by the ETC Institute that was just completed in February. So I'm going to ask Chris Tatham of ETC to come up here. And it's my understanding, this will be the first time that I think most of the people in the room will have seen these results. So.
Well, and I'd like to say as he's coming forward, there was an RFP put out, a request for proposals. It was an open bidding process for companies that do these kinds of community surveys. This is a nationally recognized firm that's here in local in the Kansas City Metro, and I think was a good choice for doing our strategic plan, or our community survey for our strategic plan. kid on Christmas morning.
Great. Hi, morning. I'm Chris Tatham. I'm the CEO for ETC Institute, and it's really great to be back. It's been a few years since I presented to this group. See a few new faces. If you're not familiar with ETC Institute, we're actually based in Olathe, Kansas. We've been around for about 30 years. Our work originally started here in the Kansas City area. We've done probably 5 or 6 surveys for the unified government over the years, but now we're actually based and doing work all over across the country. I'm going to make a few comments today often about what's going on elsewhere, how things stack up. And that's really kind of the basis for that is a national database that we have that has nearly 2 million respondents across the country. I personally managed over 1,000 surveys in the last 15 years. Our company has a database that has data from over 700 cities and counties. And so really when it comes to interpreting survey results, we like to think that we're the national leader in that arena. What I'm going to do for you today is kind of walk through how we did the survey, because I think you're the ones that are going to be making decisions with it. So it's important that you're comfortable with the results. A lot of surveys are done poorly, and so a lot of times surveys have an agenda. So if you don't really understand how the survey is done, you may have questions about its credibility. Then I'm going to give you the conclusions up front. Oftentimes there's a zillion slides, and you wonder, well, what's the final point? I used to be in the military, so I had a commission officer used to say, tell me what's up front. You know, I want to know the bottom line up front. I like to do that and then walk you through how I got there. And then I'll give you some conclusions toward the end. But most of you are familiar with the purpose. This type of survey is really designed to get input from the residents you never hear from. Nationally, fewer than 10% of residents ever show up to public meetings. And most of the people who do show up have one or two things. Either they don't like the way you're doing things, or they have a new idea and they want to change and come up with something new. And that's pretty much about 80 to 90% of the people you'll ever hear from. Most people who think things are okay, they're getting the services that they expect, they want to go through their lives. They trust you, they've elected you to make decisions, and they're not going to come up until they have a problem. So as a result, if you're only listening to the people who show up at meetings, which is an important group, you may actually get sidetracked as to what's really in the best interest of the community. So this tool is really here to help balance, to make sure you're listening to everyone in the community when you're making decisions. I'm going to share you a little bit about how you stack up to some other communities. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but the real key focus I'm going to do today is to look at what people thought the priorities were as you move forward. As far as the methodology for the survey, it was a very long survey. The survey took the average person almost 20 minutes to complete, but we had a great response rate. In fact, over 30% of the households that we contacted participated. We gave them the option to participate either online, by mailing it back, or we actually did do follow-up calls. And the way it was done is we essentially sent the survey out, and if you didn't respond, we gave you a call. And most people don't, most of you probably don't answer, you may not even answer your phone, but after you keep getting a call from ETC Institute, you're finally like, okay, what do they want? And then you're in the middle of doing something, so you're like, I can't do it right now. So if you say, well, if you call me back on Thursday at 7:15, that would be a good time. Well, we enter that in our system, and then at 7:15, we call the residents back. So 10 people that are feeling guilty, there is some civic consciousness there. So we tend to get a much higher response rate because of that, rather than you may have AT&T call you. There's no vested interest for people to participate in that survey unless they're paid. In this case, you're trying to plan the future of their community, and we tend to get a better response rate as a result. The results aren't perfect. We surveyed 1,249 households. Of those, there were 150 from each of your districts. So we have some maps, and you'll also have data that's specific for your constituents. But as I said, there isn't a margin of error in the survey, about plus or minus 2.8%. So, that's pretty good for this type of decision making. If you're doing some sort of health assessment, you might want it to be a little more precise. But all in all, we feel real good about the data. In fact, we just compared some of the results to some of the categories like age. You can see all age groups are very well represented. In addition, when you look the census data for race, this actually compares very well to the 2010 census. Same thing for Hispanic and Latino ancestry. About 1 in 4 of the respondents were Hispanic, which compares very favorably. We had good split on gender, and you can see a good distribution by household income. And so when we look at who responded to the survey, it actually mirrors the actual population very well. and you can see we have good distribution. It's fairly even by district. So one district's results aren't counting more than in others. And the reason that's important is you want to make sure that the decisions you make do really reflect the people you represent, and that's what this map shows you. It shows you the results, and if you're not sure exactly what your boundaries, I'm sure you all do, but you may not know everybody else's boundaries, we just kind of shaded in. The colors kind of blend a little bit, but you can see each of the commission districts is very well represented with at least 150 respondents from each area. Conclusion from all this is, if you don't want to believe the results, that's on you. But I can tell you, from doing this for 15, 20 years, these results are right on target with what your residents think about these issues. And so that's hopefully what you'll believe as we go through that. So with that said, if you had a big breakfast or attention deficit, whatever, this is where we're headed. Unified government is definitely moving in the right direction. This is the first time we've specifically assessed your services publicly, but our firm does lots of research. And back in 2000, we started a new product called Direction Finder, and we wanted to be able to compare communities in the Kansas City area against one another, so we went ahead and surveyed this community and a lot of other communities to know what the ranges of performance are. So this is going to be the first time that you've ever seen how things have changed since 2000, and it's very favorable. Second, when it looks at your priorities for city services, maintenance of streets, code enforcement, communication, public transit, and police are at the top of the list, and I'll show you why. We assess more than 15 different services. At the county level, it's aging, motor vehicle registration, and parks, and again, I'll go through the why. Community issues that are most important are safe neighborhoods, schools, and jobs. And there's definitely strong support for your pursuing economic investment initiatives to help improve the economy and get jobs in this area. So with that said, that's where we're headed. First signing is just the fact that the government, your performance and the perceptions of this community have improved. In 2000, we did a survey independently the same way this survey was done, and we asked exactly the same questions. We asked residents to rate how well various services were being delivered, and what you'll see in 2000 is in red. 2014, which is this survey, is in dark blue. Every major category of county services has improved. During this same period, the regional average has gotten worse. So most communities in the Kansas City area have actually seen their ratings go down over the last decade and a half, while this community has seen their ratings go up. In addition, take a look at some of the substantial improvements. Look at the maintenance of streets. Fewer than 1 in 5 people gave positive ratings. In other words, ratings of 4 or 5 back in 2000. Now it's over 1 in 3. Still opportunities to do better, but you've nearly doubled satisfaction in that area. Again, your parks are up almost 20% over the last period. Stormwater runoff, I know you did a lot to come up with new programs to make sure you had a better system there. Those have definitely paid off. So you should feel very good about where you're headed. In addition, when it just comes to things like the image of this community, in 2000, fewer than 1 in 5 residents felt that this community had a good image. Since then, you've had a lot of things happen over by the racetrack, legends, lots of things have happened just in the way your leadership has occurred, made decisions on things. You've more than doubled from 19% to 44%, which is just terrific. And quality of life, you see, has also improved significantly. So this county has done lots of things the last 20 years that have certainly moved things forward from a resident perspective. With that said, though, there's lots of opportunities to do better. So I'm going to give you both sides. So you've moved tremendously forward, but the gap is still significant. What you'll notice here on this chart is we ask people to rate a number of factors that influence their perception of the community. You'll see quality of life, how well you're planning and managing growth, the image, feeling of safety, overall appearance of the city. And you'll see while the blue is generally now stronger or higher than the red, the blue's the positives, the red's negatives, you'll see that there still are anywhere from 1/4 to 1/3 of the residents who are giving negative ratings in these areas. But it's important to point out, though, people don't say I'm neutral. They basically are rating things on a scale of 1 to 5. So a 3 is typically an okay response. So if you add the neutral to the blue, you generally have people feeling fairly good about most of these services, or most of these perceptions. But with that said, this is kind of where you stack up nationally. You'll notice, for example, the image has gone from 19% to 44%, which is just tremendous. But the average community in the Kansas City area is at 72%, and the national average is at 68%. So you can only imagine where you were when you were at 19%, because those averages have gone down a little bit. So you're definitely closing the gap, but have a ways to go. Same thing for perceptions of quality of life. It's about 3 out of 4 residents in most communities, about half here. So again, you're moving in the right direction. The decisions you make here will hopefully help you close that gap as you move forward. In addition, when it comes to perceptions as a place to live, work, raise children, where you'd buy your next home, and place to retire, you'll see, particularly when it comes to a place to buy your next home, you have 35% in the place to retire, 40%, or nearly 39%, or nearly 4 out of 10. Part of the challenge for that for communities is your ability to retain your residents. What will happen in communities that have high percentages of negativity in those questions, people move in for a while, but their ultimate goal is to move someplace else. One of the things we've seen, a good example of the change in this, is in Olathe. 15 years ago, most people were not planning to stay in Olathe. On their most recent survey, it was almost 8 out of 10 thought Olathe would be the place for their next home, and it was less than half 15 years ago. But that's a community where people have gone from seeing it as a bedroom community as a place that they can both live, work, and eventually retire. And again, you're moving in the right direction in all those, but there is some more room to do better. And you can see that on this chart. His number of areas have gaps, but the perception of schools is really impacting your perception of the community as a place to raise children. It's about 80%, 82% nationally, and in the Kansas City area, it's 43% here. And you can see as a place to retire, again, some opportunities to do better. So a lot of the decisions you're making through this process hopefully will help you continue to move double digits forward in all these areas over the next few years. And that's kind of the next point of view is, what is it that you should really focus on, and what are some of the big issues when it comes to needs being met? You'll notice that fewer than half of the residents surveyed who said they had needs for schools and employment opportunities said their needs were being met. So those as a community issues are definitely at the top. Not always as a local government can you do something about those, but I think it's important in your decision making to be aware that those are issues that are affecting and of concern to residents. Yeah.
When you do a survey in a suburban area that is more of a bedroom community, how do they rank their employment opportunities in terms of, because they probably don't work there? So how does that rank out with a bedroom community? I'm just curious about that.
This is a little different. This isn't one of our benchmarking questions. We tend to ask this occasionally. So I'd be speaking, unlike the other ones where I can tell you that this is the average. It tends to rate higher than this, though, because even if you're a bedroom community, you're oftentimes choosing that suburb because it has proximity to highways. So, a good example is you might live in a suburb in Dallas, but you work in Dallas, but you've picked one of the, suburbs, and you get very, very good ratings just based on the proximity to other jobs. Yeah.
Can we pass the microphone to Commissioner King, please?
The quality of school issues may have been somewhat answered in the lawsuit. Hopefully it is, but when you look at the quality of schools and how the kids are doing in the 4 different school districts, plus the Catholic school that's here, I think what happened yesterday, they're going to see that number turn around a great deal because of the lack of monies. And as Cindy Lane said yesterday, Superintendent of KCK, first thing she's going to do is reduce the size of the students in the classroom. So although that number may look bad, I believe it'll get better.
Yeah, and I'm just highlighting these because many of these things aren't necessarily city or county services, but if you're not aware of how people are being affected by other issues, you may not make the best decisions with the services and the dollars that you actually have. And so just knowing that that's a big issue, that can be something that you could do that provide the greatest services in the world, but at the end of the day, it would be imagine you built the greatest hotel in the world, but it's built in a place nobody wants to go. Doesn't matter that it has great services and great customer staff. If it's not where people want to be, probably not going to be real successful. Same thing is, as you provide services, if you're not aware of what else is going on that affects residents, you may not be able to build the confidence. But if they believe you understand as leaders what the bigger set of issues are, it empowers you to get the confidence of the community so you can lead the government of the community even more effectively. Now, with those issues identified, thought we'd kind of walk through specifically what your we're kind of responsible for, and kind of start off with the city services. And you'll notice we had folks rate a number of them. I won't read them all to you, but we have fire, ambulance, working your way down to stormwater, and then as you come down, you can see the areas with the lower ratings: planning and zoning, code enforcement, and street maintenance. In fact, street maintenance is the one that people have the most concern about. But if you didn't have that earlier chart that I showed you, you wouldn't know that 36% is 17 points above where you were 15 years ago. So you've definitely moved in the right direction. People are feeling better, but you still have some opportunities to do better. Several of your services actually rank very well. You'll see some of the highest ones there with your public safety, your trash collection, police, recycling actually rate very, very well. As you come down, you'll see your stormwater. We've seen improvements, as I showed you before, as a result of some of the investments you've made over the past several years. But streets, communication, public treads, even parks and recreation are some of the areas that rate lower. And I'll highlight parks and recreation because that tends to be a better rated service in most communities. So the fact that it's down here, sort of in your bottom group, is one of the gaps that this community has compared to other communities. So and what I'll show you is on some maps. What I've done is I've shaded the districts. And the reason I'm showing you these is oftentimes when you have 8 different districts, you'll discuss where you're different more than you'll discuss where you have alignment. And what I want to actually show you is there's actually strong alignment on the priorities in this community. But it's oftentimes your differences that end up being the thing you discuss because that's where your differences are. When it comes to perception of police services, you'll notice the entire county is in the blue color. And that means it pretty much doesn't matter where you go in this county, people give the same rating regardless of which district they in for their quality of police services. And the equity in your service delivery is actually a pretty significant achievement because it's very rare that people in a diverse county like this would have all the same levels of satisfaction. In fact, when you go on and you look at fire services, very high. In fact, several areas of the county, the average rating is nearly a 5. You know, that's the very satisfied or the dark blue. So you're doing great in your fire services countywide. When it comes to ambulance services, again, generally uniform, high ratings in all districts. As you move down, trash collection, the same level of rating throughout the county. When you look at storm water, though, you'll see, obviously, as you get closer to the rivers, people are more concerned. Not a real surprise, but there are some differences east and west. So folks, as you go west, probably going to care a little less about it because they're more satisfied. Folks, as you go east, closer to the rivers, have a little more concern. Parks and recreation, you can see it's kind of a north-south issue. Folks up north tend to give a little bit lower ratings than people to the south. As you look at the overall perceptions of customer service, interestingly, as you get more toward the core of where your services are provided, like this area, ratings tend to go up. As you get a little further away, ratings tend to be a little bit lower. Public transit, fairly uniform throughout the county, just a little pockets a little higher. But the street maintenance issue, that's not just one district. You'll notice that the colors is now in the neutral. We're headed down. So I kind of started high. I'm working my way low. Street maintenance, uniform. This isn't just one district's issue. This is everyone's issue. Code enforcement. This isn't one district's issue. This is everyone's issue. And communication. This isn't one issue. This is everyone's issue. So as you go through some of these, it's not just one area. It's the entire county feel about the same. So we then ask folks, well, what are your top priorities? Because frankly, it could be that everybody in your district or everybody in this county is dissatisfied with something, but if nobody cares and you spend $1 billion on that issue, people will probably actually be upset that you spent money on something they didn't care about. So it's not just a matter of what the satisfaction rating is, it's also what the priority is they place on that service. So we asked people what they thought the top priority should be over the next couple years. Notice at the top, street maintenance. What we found in other communities around the country is oftentimes if there's concerns about safety and appearance and things like that, infrastructure investments oftentimes are great ways to address that. Before the economic recession really hit Florida hard in 2008, one of the most effective counties in the country for using infrastructure as a way to change public perception was Miami-Dade County. Rather than putting out more police officers, they would go into areas that were more blighted. They'd put in new roads and streets, and people would take an area that looked unsafe because the road was crumbling. They suddenly thought they were safe, even though crime hadn't changed at all. but the street investments, the infrastructure investments, the sidewalks, the lighting cause people to feel better about the community. And that's often the case. So when people's perceptions, in many ways, are everything. And that's why education and communication are so important. And you notice that that's the fourth highest issue on the list. People in this community want to know what you're doing. They want to be kept informed. They want to believe that you're in touch with their priorities. And it's unusual to have communication be that high unless people are really wanting to be more engaged and better informed about what's going on. You'll see police and code enforcement are up there, public transportation, parks and recreation, kind of around the top set of issues. But infrastructure with your streets, almost as many people pick that as a first choice as the top three choices for any other item. You can see the blue next to police services. There's more people picking that as their top choice than any of the other city services that were assessed. The other thing that we do with this, though, is we actually have an analysis, first of which is geographic. And what I want to do is emphasize to you is over here on the far left, you'll see the top overall priorities for the county. Maintenance of streets, police, code enforcement, communication, and transit. To the right are the top priorities for each of your district. And what we've done is color-coded those priorities. You'll notice that maintenance of streets is the #1 priority in every district. In fact, 8 out of the 8 districts had it in their top 5, obviously, since it was the #1 priority. If you work your way down to police, it was #1 or #2 in 7 of the 8 districts. It was #3 in District 4 overall. It was at the, 8 out of 8 picked it in the top 5. Code enforcement, you see, was in 6 out of the 8 districts picked it in their top 5. Communication was it picked in the top 5 in all 8 districts, and public transit was picked in the top 5 in 6 out of the 8 districts. So when it comes to your issues, for the most part, there's pretty strong agreement. The perceptions of the level of service and the priorities are very consistent throughout the county. And hopefully that will help you make decisions and come together on some of your major decisions and where you invest as you move forward. In addition, we did some analysis that basically combines both the importance and satisfaction rating. In other words, this is kind of a follow-up to what I said before. Nobody cares about it just because they're dissatisfied doesn't mean that you should invest a lot in the issue. But if the satisfaction rating is really low and people really think it's important, that's usually where you have the greatest opportunities to change people's perception about the county. In other words, if your goal is to enhance overall satisfaction, targeting your resources or your messages or your actions in those service areas that are most important, where satisfaction is low, will have the highest returns on future satisfaction. And you'll see maintenance of streets is clearly the #1 issue. It's followed by code enforcement and communication. Remember, communication was 4th as a priority, but satisfaction's lower, which has raised it in this overall analysis. And you can see then public transit and police kind of round out the top 5. And if you're looking at this, if you're not, many of you may be left-brain learners and you love, here's a list and here's numbers. If you're more of a visual learner, I've got that here for you too. This is the same information, but it's put more on a quadrant, on a thing that shows you quadrants. What you see here is as you go left to right, the things on the right side are more important than those on the left. From the bottom to top, the things at the bottom tend to get lower ratings than those on the top. So what we're looking for are things that are over to the right in the lower quadrant. And you'll notice that's over there. These are things that are more important where the ratings are lower, and that's where you see code enforcement, streets, communication, public transportation. Police services, you're doing better, but it's a really important service, and that's why it has flagged up there. The items that are in that little circle there, we call that the circle of equilibrium, because essentially you're always going to have something in certain quadrants, but if you're only a little ways from the axis, it means your resources are allocated in a good way relative to expectations. But clearly those 5 areas are things that this county, if you invest, emphasize over the next 2, 3, 4, 10 years, you'll probably pay big dividends in the perceptions that residents have of the government, particularly your city services. Now, shifting over to county services, similar thing. We asked residents to rate everything from your parks, your sheriff's office, motor vehicle registration, aging services, and services for developmental disabilities. One of the things that pops out to you is motor vehicle registration. You say, wow, 31%. Your neighbor to the south has a 26% dissatisfaction rating. And And the overall satisfaction rating here is 45 compared to 46% in Johnson County. Part of the motor vehicle issue has to do with the state and other issues. So that's not just, yeah. Part of that issue has to do with the state, not just the county. So, however, it is something that residents care a lot about, and I'll show you that in just a little bit. But it's clearly not just Wyandotte County there. You also notice that your sheriff's office, well, I want to highlight here a number of these. You see there's a lot of people giving threes. One of the things that really high-performing organizations do is they try to get a lot of fives. See, 5 is what we talk about when we talk about brand equity. You know, if you're a local government and have lots of brand equity, you can mess things up and people think, oh, it's okay. I'll give you a good example. We actually do quarterly surveys for both Kansas City, Missouri Water and Johnson County Water 1. A couple years ago, you all might remember because it was in this area. I usually tell this story around the country, but it happened right here. I think it was maybe 2 or 3 summers ago. We had a water main break on the Kansas City, Missouri side. Resulted in a boil order. We do their satisfaction ratings, and their satisfaction went down significantly that quarter because people thought, you know, that it shouldn't have happened. Water 1 had a boil order just a couple miles away from that on the Kansas side. They issued a boil order for almost the same thing. Their satisfaction rating went up 1% that quarter. And you say, how does that possibly happen? Where essentially the same event covered by the same media within probably 10 miles of each other, how do you get one organization's ratings to go down and the others to go up? It's because Water 1 has great brand equity. Kansas City, Missouri is building it. In other words, not as much. And so what happens is an organization, if you don't have strong brand equity, if something goes wrong, they blame you. They think, boy, they should have prepared better. They should have known that was going to break. It's their fault it took place. But if you have great brand equity, you think, well, they did everything possible. Mistakes happen. It's okay. And I'm really glad they told me not to drink the water. You know, that's what happens. And so as an organization, if you're trying to become a high-performing organization and build up brand equity, you'll have those 5s grow. And organizations around the country that are some of the best performers oftentimes have 20, 25, 30% of the residents giving them 5s, to the point that they can make some pretty significant mistakes, but residents give them the benefit of the doubt. It takes years and a long period of time to do that, but that's one of the things. And the reason it's important to build brand equity is if you have it, there's more confidence in the local government, more support for the initiatives, your ability to sustain funding over time is better, you're less distracted by media and things like that that cause you to go off course, and those are opportunities I think as you move forward. It's not today, but looking out 10, 15 years, that should certainly be something you're thinking about. And you'll notice a lot of people are just giving you a 3. You know, a lot of white on this, and that's because these aren't don't knows. You know, in other words, people who said they don't know, we've excluded them. These are people who haven't had a real strong or a negative experience. And a lot of times that can be influenced just by telling people what you're doing. In other words, if they know there's, you know, parks out there, but they never visit them, or they don't really know what your programs are or what you're offering, that could be one of the reasons that you've got 1 in 3 residents giving you a kind of a mediocre rating for your parks. Whereas if they actually knew you had done something at new parks, so there were new programs, it might change their opinion. So opportunities to do better just from letting people know what you're doing. When it comes to perceptions across the county, your election office ratings are pretty much uniform throughout the county. Sheriffs, you'll see a little bit lower to the central and down to the south and west. Quality of parks for county is almost the same as we saw for the city. Up north, a little bit lower ratings than the ratings to the south. Customer service, very similar to the city ratings. In other words, as you get more to the core of the city, people feel a little bit better about customer service. Developmental disabilities, you can see, are pretty much the same throughout the county. Aging services as well. And remember on aging services, the link to this was that question about what you thought about rating the county as a place to retire. Remember, almost 40% of the folks gave negative ratings, and so part of it is people may say, well, you know, I'd like to stay in Wyandotte County, but I'm afraid if I do, I'm not going to have the services and the support that I need as I get older, and then they decide to move someplace else. So part of, if you address this issue, it can change people's perceptions about their long-term desire to stay in the community. And you can see, again, motor vehicle registration, but that's not really unique to this county. And even the appraiser's office, though a lower rated area, is fairly uniform throughout the county. When we looked at the priorities, motor vehicle registration right at the top of the list, and that's kind of common right now in the state of Kansas and various counties. But it is important for you to know that. But aging services, your parks, customer service, and developmental disabilities kind of round out the top 5, and all of those had almost 1/4 or more of your residents picking it as one of their top priorities. And so when we did the analysis, yeah.
You talked about, you did a survey on disabilities. Did you have anything on mental health?
We didn't have specific. We had developmental disabilities. We didn't have anything related to mental health per se. So
is that ever an issue that you survey in other communities?
we have included it. We didn't include it on this survey, but we have included it elsewhere. So when it comes to the ratings by district, you'll notice that motor vehicle registration was in the top 5 in all 8 districts. It was actually, as you go to districts 5 through 8, the number 1 priority. Aging services was the top priority for districts 1 through 4. And then you can see on the second overall was aging, and you can kind of see the mix by county. Parks was a strong 3, pretty much throughout the county. A couple differences. You can see in District 4 it was second. In District 2 it was 4th, but overall it was the 3rd highest issue. Customer service was next, and services for developmental disabilities was next. Part of it as you're making decisions too is just because something's at the very top of the list, you might also see, well, what can you impact the most? And so part of the decisions as leaders, as you know what these top issues are, is given dollar per dollar, where can you make the difference? And you can make a difference in all these areas, but if you had $1, where would it probably go a little bit further? And one of the ways also to take a look at this analysis that I showed you before is to look at kind of your return on investment. Remember the maintenance compared to the next item was about twice the level. So maintenance is substantially higher. In this case, aging services, motor vehicle registration is fairly equal. So even though motor vehicle registration was rated, as a slightly higher priority countywide, aging, given the levels of satisfaction, which are lower at 34% compared to 45%, has a little more opportunity to change people's perceptions of the county. And then you can see developmental disabilities, customer service, and parks. And customer service is very, very rarely at the top of the list. Just to be candid with you. It's also compared to 10 miles of streets, a lot cheaper typically to change the culture. And so one of the things that you should consider in the short term is what can you do to change the way just the existing employees respond to residents. Changing the culture is a place that doesn't cost a lot of money, and frankly, it's one of the highest priorities, and it's relatively, compared to other communities, a place that you could certainly do better. And so those are the kind of things, as you look at this data, think that you should consider. You have a great employee base, but customers want to feel, at least your residents, like they're being treated like customers, and I think that's an opportunity that doesn't cost quite as much as redoing all the streets in the county. In addition, you can see the same data for those of you who are right brain learners. You'll see aging services for developmental disabilities are really kind of down the bottom right. Motor vehicle registration, customer service, and parks rate a little better than average, but they're relatively important. And you can see your parks as your highest rated service, but it's also one of the most important to people, which is why it's an area that you should continue to emphasize. So that's kind of where things lay out as far as your priorities. Some of the other things that we looked on the survey had to do with your economic development issues. What do people think about some of the things that you're considering? One of the things we asked people is how they thought the efforts to promote economic development in the community should change over the next 5 years. Given the lower ratings for the community as a place to work, probably not a real surprise that almost 3 out of 4 people thought you should be doing more than you're doing now. You had some folks that don't know, some that said it'd be the same. Only 3% said it should be reduced. So almost a 25-to-1 ratio, or I guess it's 24-to-1 ratio. People think you should be doing more than less. So if you run into somebody who complains that you're doing too much, giving the county away, all those kind of things, remember there's 24 people out there that think you should be doing more than you're doing now. In addition, we asked them how supportive they would be of having the city and county use incentives to attract businesses or expand existing business in Kansas City and Wyandotte County. 73% said they'd be supportive. Only 10% said they'd be not supportive, over a 7-to-1 ratio. So for everybody who tells you don't do that, there's actually 7 people out there. In fact, the intense response, 4 out of 10 people say they're very supportive of doing that. In addition, we asked people where they thought you should focus your economic development efforts. Indian Springs, downtown Minnesota area, at the top of the list. When it comes to industrial, you'll see Fairfax, Kansas Avenue, and Turner. We're at the top of the list. So, and remember the respondent base on these is equally distributed in all districts. So the fact that you do get some means that people who live outside those districts are picking other places for you to focus on. In addition, we asked people a number of questions just about their perceptions of issues related to economic development. County needs more high-paying jobs. People responded to that very passionately. Over half gave a rating of 5 on a 5-point scale. Same thing, that desire that people want to stay here. So remember, you've got that data up front where people are planning to leave, but that's not, they'd really like to stay and live here, and they'd hope you have better aging services so they can feel like they could eventually retire here. That's the desire. People want to be in this county. They like this county, but their concerns is that their long-term either economic or aging requirements aren't going to be met, so they end up moving someplace else. And so those are things that really to work on to changing so you can retain people once they come here. It's always one of those things about customer service. It's easier to retain customers than it is to get new customers. Well, if you can get your existing residents to want to stay here and get them to move up to their next house here, that in of itself can completely change and transform your community. Whereas if people are coming here just to start and planning to leave as soon as they can, that's going to be a much harder environment for you to work in. Looking about the support for attracting more retail and industrial, see both of those are very strong. In fact, everything we asked on this chart, everything from dining options to more hotels, people generally agreed with everything. In fact, these perceptions are fairly uniform. Look at this chart, dark blue when it comes to the needing more high-paying job. It doesn't matter what district you live in this county, people feel very strongly about that. Support for retail stores, you can see a little more intense in one area, but generally fairly uniform throughout the county. Industrial development, also very same throughout the county. So these perceptions certainly are not unique to one district or another. In addition, I know there's some non-economic issues that you're looking at, so we thought we'd ask people what they think. Some of these I think you've worked on for many years, so we just asked people again what they thought. First thing, sale and use of fireworks. Over half said yes, 34% said no, and 10% of the people didn't have an opinion. So this is going to be a controversial, because anytime you have 34% to 50, that's a lot of people on both sides of the fence. Not going to make everybody happy, but the ratio right now of support to opposition is 5 to 3. So I didn't break that out by district, but that'll be in the final report if you're actually interested. When it comes to support of having you move to prevent or move to conceal carry of handguns in public buildings in Wyandotte County, ratio is about 2 to 1. Very support. People who believe that believe it passionately at 42%. People who don't are kind of the same way, but people lean to support. You can see the total support's 53%, 28%, so it's about a 2 to 1 of supporting it versus opposition. And then the idea of expanding or building a new jail, you can see again, in this case, it's the highest supported issue. You've got about a 5 to 1 ratio, people supporting it to non-support. The very supportive to non-supportive is over 2 to 1. Total support's over 50%, and you can see that it's 5 to 1 altogether, the ratio. So that's something, even without a lot of information, we didn't tell them how much it was going to cost and things like that. People leaned favorably toward that issue. So, last couple things I wanted to share with you have to do with just general perceptions. If I want to start off, here's your community issues as a whole. Kind of come back to that here at the end of the presentation. And you'll notice when we ask people, what community issues, really are the things to focus on? Not county services or city services, but what do people really care about? Low crime and safe neighborhoods, schools, and jobs are the top 3. In fact, the idea of having safe neighborhoods, again, almost more people pick that as the top choice than the top 3, anything else. So whatever you can do as county leaders to reinforce the message of safety. Sometimes safety is a perception, sometimes it's a reality. If it's a reality, you have to respond in one way, typically with resources and police and response times. But if it's a perception, it's oftentimes an education issue. And so that's one of the things is to understand, is this a perception, taking some of your data and even matching it up to how people rate different issues.